I started reading in 1978 when I was 4 years old. The earliest book I remember having is The Gingerbread Man by Bonnie and Bill Rutherford. This is a golden book, and it's based on the original Gingerbread Boy fairy tale from 1875. After that, I got the Pinocchio Book and Record by Peter Pan Records, and I would read along and listen to the record performed by the Rocking Horse Players and Orchestra on our Kenner Close and Play automatic phonograph.
Stop! Stop! Ouch! You're hurting me!
Now this isn't the Disney version. This is based on the original novel by Carlo Collodi from 1883. And of course all children had little golden books. I'm sure many of us remember the all-time best-selling Sesame Street book, The Monster, at the end of this book. And along with that I had Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Henrietta Meets Someone New. Here's a photo of me reading it in the summer of 1978, a few months after my 4th birthday. And on the show, Mr. Rogers' mailman, Mr. McFeely, was played by actor David Newell. And when I met him in 2017, I got him to sign a copy of his book, Speedy Delivery. And my favorite show at night was Donnie and Marie. And I love this book, The Top Secret Project. I even got this frame tray puzzle. The only book I remember my brother having back then was the ever-popular and award-winning Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. I would see this book on a table full of Highlights magazine at every dentist and doctor office I ever visited as a kid. I even saw it in Target last week. I remember a few years back my brother took one of his kids to the doctor and it was there in the waiting room. So he read it for the first time in decades and said he didn't like it. I actually never read it until last week, and although I think it's all right, I'm just shocked that a book that consists of only 10 sentences could have achieved the level of success that it has. Now, a decade ago, I saw the live-action film directed by David Bowie's son, and I thought it was really cool, but I wished Sid and Marty Krofft would make an H.R. Pufnstuf movie just like it. Now, interestingly, the boy from the book is named Max, and my brother named his first kid Max. Coincidence? I started school in 1979, but in 1980, we got the Scholastic Book Club, and the first book I got was The Secret Hideout by John Peterson. Man, I love this book. I probably read it 100 times. Two brothers find an old hidden book behind a loose brick in the wall of their grandmother's cellar that details the location of a secret hideout and the trials to perform to become a member of the secret club that meets there. It even has instructions on how to create the animal disguises, shields, weapons, and whistles that the kids in the book make from the descriptions they find in the hidden book. And the twist ending is the best. Even though it was a very popular book by Peterson, he's more well known for his later creation, The Littles.
Here come the Littles.
We knew this as a cartoon series in 1983, and were shocked to find the original Littles books in our elementary school library. The first Littles book was published in 1967, 2 years after The Secret Hideout, but in between the two, he put out a sequel called The Enemies of the Secret Hideout. I didn't know about that book as a kid, but in it, they try to recruit some new members for the club. Well, after the first time of reading The Secret Hideout, my brother and I tried to do the same thing. We spent the whole afternoon making 4 obstacle course books. We drew out the diagrams, wrote the instructions, had it all done up in crayon, multiple pages stapled together, and we called over our friends that lived a block away in our little neighborhood. Chad, who was my age, and his older brother Todd, who was my brother's age. Now when they arrived, we met them outside and told them all about the secret hideout. And we gave them each a booklet, and the 4 of us were going to go through the trials to become members of a new secret club. Excitedly, they said, let's go down by the canal to start. And when we got down there, they said, watch. And then they tore up the booklets and threw them in the canal, walked away laughing. The Secret Hideout was actually John Peterson's second book. His first was from the year before in 1964, Tony's Treasure Hunt, about a little boy going on an adventure with his cat. My brother also got a book from the Scholastic Book Club. Super Fudge by Judy Blume. I just read this again last night, and I still think it's awesome. Now, it says right on the cover that it's a sequel to Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. So I got that book too, but I remembered a lot of it, so I must have checked it out of the library when I was a kid. In it, you get to find out why Peter's dog is named Turtle in Super Fudge. And looking at Judy Blume's list of books, I remembered Freckle Juice, the book about a little girl that mixes up a concoction to get rid of the freckles she didn't want. I remembered this book my whole life, even when my daughter wanted to mix up something to get rid of her freckles. So I got that book too. But guess what? It's about a boy that mixes up a concoction to get freckles, because there's a girl in his class that has them and he wants them too. My memory had this all twisted around for 40 years. Super Fudge really holds up. I'd recommend it to any kid. In fact, they made a TV series out of it in the 90s with Eve Plum, Jan from the Brady Bunch, playing his mom. And Judy Blume is still alive. She's even written 2 more books about Fudge. Now, the following year, Clash of the Titans came to the theater, and I've spoken several times about the importance of this film to my life in previous videos. I also was first exposed to Dungeons and Dragons that year. I had a growing interest in Greek and Norse mythology at the time. Hercules, Jason and the Argonauts, Thor, Odin. And when I entered the 3rd grade in 1982, we were allowed to pick one book from the back of the room every Friday to read for a little while. And I always grabbed this, Myths Every Child Should Know. It's a collection of stories from Greek and Norse mythology, and I probably read it a dozen times that year. But when the school year was coming to an end, I was afraid to leave this book behind in the classroom. Well, with the urging from my friend Richie, I took it with me on the last day of school. Now, it's not Richie's fault that I stole this book. In fact, I'm pretty ashamed about it because, well, not only is it wrong, but that was the only teacher I ever had that nominated me for Citizen of the Week for the newspaper. Since then, I've collected a couple of shelves full of books about mythology, but I haven't been able to devote the time I'd like to reading all of them yet. Now, Norse myths go back 800 years, Greek myths go back 3,200 years, but older than both of them is Egyptian mythology, which goes back 5,000 years. The most famous figure from ancient Egypt is King Tut, who lived 3,300 years ago. And in 1983, I found The Diary of the Boy King Tutankhamun by June Reig in my elementary school library and checked it out several times during the years that I was there. This is a fictionalized account of King Tut's life, told from his point of view, starting on his 8th birthday and going 10 years till right before he died. And it ends with a letter from his wife saying that she found this and was putting it in his tomb with the rest of his belongings, to later be discovered when his tomb was found in 1922. Now, I grew up thinking this was a real diary, but it's not. It was actually published in 1978, the same year that the author June Reig was a creative consultant on a TV documentary about King Tut hosted by Orson Welles. And it was also the same year that Steve Martin had his hit song, King Tut, which we had on an 8-track.
Now when he was a young man, he never thought he'd see people stand in line to see the boy king. King Tut.
I haven't read this since I was a kid. I'm looking forward to doing it again. It's probably been about 37 years. The last book I got from the Scholastic Book Club was The Boy from the UFO by Margaret Gough Clark in 1984, my final year of elementary school. And I read this book about 2 or 3 times in the 80s and forgot about it until 2013 when I pulled it back out. Originally, it was released in hardcover under the title Barney and the UFO. And it was followed by a sequel, hardcover book called Barney in Space, which then came to paperback as The Boy from the UFO Returns. And that was followed by a 3rd and final book, Barney on Mars. Now, this didn't get a paperback version. Now, I read all three of them back then, but I've completely forgotten what happened in them over the last 7 years. Except I do remember telling my friend at work, Gary, that I had rediscovered these books and was reading them, and he got overly angry at me for reading a children's book. I don't know, am I doing something wrong? Anyway, I do kind of remember it was about an ordinary boy like myself who was visited at night by a strange alien boy on a UFO, and he convinced him to take him back to his home planet. It was told in a realistic and mysterious way, probably because the author was a mystery writer. And can you believe she's still alive at 107 years old? Now at home we had other books, like these 3 volumes of my mom's. The Swiss Family Robinson, King Arthur and His Knights, and the Arabian Nights. I think these were her only non-Agatha Christie books. And she bought me these 2 hardcover books, Grimm's Fairy Tales and Gulliver's Travels. I know I read this one probably 50 times. We also had this 7-book set of the Chronicles of Narnia, which my brother read and really liked. I only read the first one, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And for some reason, we only had 6 books in the house through the 80s because the second book, Prince Caspian, was left underneath our stilt house in a wood pile up on a shelf above my head. And fortunately, right before we moved, I went down there and I dug through the wood and found the book and put it together with the set. Now all I need to do is read them. My brother gave me this 4-book set by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now I read and loved The Hobbit, but I found the first book of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, to be so ponderous, I never read the other 2. Maybe someday. And these 5 illustrated classic editions from Moby Books seem to be on our bookshelves since the 1970s. My brother read all of these too, and I haven't yet. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Moby Dick, The Mutiny on the Bounty, The Count of Monte Cristo, and David Copperfield. I've even bought 5 more. The Last of the Mohicans, Sherlock Holmes, The Three Musketeers, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and Ben-Hur. In 1987, our parents bought us these hardcover books from the Treasury of Children's Classics. I got Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, and my brother got White Fang by Jack London. I've since added the sequel to my book, Huckleberry Finn, and the predecessor to my brother's, The Call of the Wild. And last but not least, we got these classic Big Little books with Flip-It cartoons in 1979. Bugs Bunny and Klondike Gold for me, and Popeye and Queen Olive Oyl for my brother.